We're now going to discuss the Baroque, and there's going to be a couple different regional areas I'm going to separate this discussion into. So we'll go through Italian, then Dutch, and then finally French. So what is the Baroque? First off, notice it comes from an Italian term, and it basically refers to this idea of a misshapen pearl. Uh, what I take away from this typically is that this is sort of an eccentric style. Um, Again, you can see from the next bullet points, it's one that's very dramatic and very theatrical. And so I think maybe perhaps that's where the term sort of fit. It's this idea of something very dramatic and theatrical. So you're going to see a lot of energy and motion in these works, and you're going to see a lot of contrast, a lot of light and dark playing against one another. I particularly like Baroque works because, again, of this energy, of this drama. This appeals to me more as an art historian than sort of logical rationality. So for me, I actually like Baroque, let's say, in contrast to the Renaissance. I know that's almost like, sacrilege in the world of art history, but again, right, there's a but for every seat. So we're going to look at Italian Baroque first, and then we will, again, move into the Dutch and French discussions a little later on. Now, I picked out people I think artists that I think exemplify the style. And the first one we're going to talk about is Caravaggio. And Caravaggio, to me, is the Baroque. We credit him really for starting the painting style that most other artists are going to use. So even if you go to France or go to the Dutch region, when you look at these other artists, you should see echoes or hallmarks, right, of Caravaggio's style. And what really is his style made up of? There's really sort of four main hallmarks, right, or points to look for. The first you'll notice is this very dark background, which really is done, we believe, to help you not be distracted, right, by anything else in the composition. So you always notice these really black or really blank backgrounds. You'll then notice that everything is really close to you or close to the picture plane, the front of the picture plane. So the viewer, when they're looking at the image, everything's very close to the front of the picture plane. The action is very immediate. You're looking sort of right at it. There's no recession into depth in these kind of pictures. So again, you can contrast that with the Renaissance, which was very into use of linear perspective and recession right into a composition. Obviously, you're not going to see that here. So everything's really very much at the front of the picture plane. You'll notice this overall spotlight effect, sort of the sense of a spotlight that looks like it's kind of at the bottom of the piece, sort of shining up right on the composition. That's another hallmark you'll see. And then finally, you'll see the use of diagonals. Not so pronounced here, but again, you'll see it in a lot of other works a little bit more pronounced. Here, I think what you notice is the action and energy that's mentioned as far as Baroque. The horse hoof about to come down, right? The arms that are thrown out, right? So that's more what you notice here. But overall, you usually notice an asymmetrical composition. Going back to the construction language that we covered in the first few chapters, you'll notice this is very much usually asymmetrical compositions or use of diagonals are done here. And I gave you a term that you should be very familiar with, again, from the earlier chapters, which is chiaroscuro. And Caravaggio and other Baroque painters are very much indebted to the chiaroscuro methodology. So you're going to see them deploying that again and again and again. This is obviously a biblical subject. And Caravaggio did a lot of biblical subjects, but I don't usually actually focus on the subject matter as much as the technique when I'm talking about these pieces, because that's really what you're looking at and what you're more concerned with. And again, just the chiaroscuro diagram in case you need a reminder there about how it works. Another artist who we say is very indebted to Caravaggio, also an Italian Baroque painter, is Artemisia Gentileschi. And I gave you the full name because one of the things that's important about Gentileschi is that she is one of the first prominent female painters that we encounter in art history. Now, why is this? Simple reasons, really. Women weren't given opportunities to train as painters or go to art schools. It just simply wasn't done. So normally what happens is they train with a family member, perhaps a father or a brother, and that's how they became painters. Gentileschi's father was a very well-known Italian Baroque painter, so there you go. So that was usually what they did. They didn't have usually the opportunity for art school. Gentileschi, her father actually tried to take her to get her admission to art school. And the story goes that people doubted that this was her work that he was presenting and said, how do we not know that you did these paintings or you did these drawings and you're just trying to pass her off, as a good artist? So that shows you, the thinking of the time, that women were just not given really the opportunities for art schooling, right? So Gentileschi had to overcome a lot of barriers. Another important thing about her background is that she was raped by one of her father's students, who he had tasked with teaching her. And this horrific event that she actually accused him of, she didn't just let him get away with it. She accused him of it. She took him to court, much to her own injury, because at the time, a lot of people put the blame on her. But she was very brave. She took him to court, right, and sort of went after him. And many people feel that event impacts the kind of subjects that you see, such as this one, Judith and Holofernes, which she's very famous for, where this is an apocryphal biblical story where an Assyrian general had gone into a Jewish village to take over. And it's said in the story that Judith and her handmaiden, who you see in the painting, plot to get him very drunk and then basically defeat him by cutting off his head. Many people who know the background of Artemisia talk about, is this her fantasy about what she would do to her rapist if she had the chance? Beyond that, if you look at the construction, again, you can see all the hallmarks of Caravaggio, the dark background, everything very close to the front of the picture plane, diagonals, right, energy and motion, right? You see the spotlight effect. You see everything that I'd mentioned here in the painting. And again, this was a theme that she quite liked. So again, another Gentileschi view of the same story again. As far as Italian Baroque sculpture, we credit Bernini with being the best example there. And this is Bernini's version of David. And I'd mentioned that you'll see 3 different versions of David. This is the final one, the Italian Baroque one. And true to Italian Baroque, right, you see energy, you see drama, you see motion. I don't even think I need to explain much. You just look at it and you can see why this would be a great example of Italian Baroque sculpture. And it's really, Bernini's just really a great, great figure for showing you this. And again, if you want to compare and contrast, you can look at the two Bernini and Michelangelo side by side and look at the Renaissance envisionment of David and the Baroque envisionment of David. And I'm sure right away you can see why these are 2 different time periods with 2 different artists working from 2 different perspectives. Another famous piece by Bernini is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, based on a story about a saint a nun, where she became sainted later, of course, a nun who was said to have visions. And one of her visions was of this angel with a flaming arrow who pierces her heart with the love of God. And so we're seeing Bernini bring that to life here. I would argue, again, this is another very Italian Baroque setup. The flow of the garments around the bodies, right? You have the rays of the light coming down the gold beams. You have the angel approaching. Everything about it speaks to this kind of energy that the style is known for.